Welcome into Seattle Seahawks today. I am your host, Tom Downey, here to answer all of your guys' questions on all things Seahawks on today's mailbag. We'll begin with a Russell Wilson one from Silver Ace. He wants to know how Russ asking for a better offensive line turns into him leaving Seattle, and also wants to know if David Moore leaves, who would be a good replacement. Very fair question. I know how frustrating it can get when the quarterback says something that, for the most part, everyone already agreed on. The offensive line needs to be a little bit better. I think the root problem here is that it came publicly. And I think from that perspective, because it's a bit unusual to see the quarterback publicly asking for things after the star quarterback said he wanted to throw the ball more and that he wasn't happy with the firing of the offensive coordinator, and to how involved he wants to be when it comes to the decision-making process. I think the natural assumption or inference there is, hey, maybe there's some issues between Pete Carroll and Russ. And frankly, I think there are some underlying issues. It's also been a relationship that's been around for a significant period of time. By NFL standards, it's one of the longer ones you end up seeing. So maybe the two sides could use some couples counseling, if you will. Russ is not getting traded this year. That doesn't make sense for Russ. It doesn't make sense for Seattle. If the two sides can't come to an agreement and, of course, produce better results, well, then maybe at some point down the road, things end up falling apart and one of the two sides decides to move on. I will make note, though, Russ has a no-trade clause. So until Russ decides he doesn't want to be a Seahawk, he's going to continue to be a Seattle Seahawk for the foreseeable future. I wouldn't worry too much about it at this point. As for David Moore, we'll talk receivers here in just a little bit. Before we do that, though, every question on today's mailbag comes from a Seattle Seahawks Today subscriber. So if you want to be involved on future mailbags, and those will happen, I promise you, simply make sure you guys are subscribed. You don't miss out on the mailbags, and of course, you won't miss out on any of the other videos we put together here. So hit that big red button and subscribe today. Let's go now to Brant Maiden, who says, do you think we should be looking at for a corner in free agency, or do you think Dunbar and Griffin are good? I think that's kind of the root problem, is that I do think Shaquill Griffin and Quinton Dunbar are really good players. And you throw in DJ Reed and Marquise Blair, that's an awesome top four. The problem is DJ Reed is a bit unproven still, but he'll be back. That's the only one you know for certain. Marquise Blair coming off his own injury. Let's assume he does. That's your nickel corner. Your top two outside corners then were supposed to be Griffin and Dunbar, and they're both free agents as well. If you can bring back one or both, corner's in fantastic shape. If you lose them both, since you're not going to franchise tag them in free agency, you are going to have to look at in other directions, both in the draft or, of course, in the free agent market as well. So I like Dunbar and Griffin. Might not be a matter of if I think they're good enough or not. It's can the team afford to re-sign them and or, of course, choose to actually do so. From Lil Smooch, unusual name, is re-signing Jamal Adams our first priority, or should we prioritize our offensive line first? Great question. With where we sit right now in the NFL calendar, you can re-sign Jamal Adams whenever you want. You can't sign a free agent offensive lineman outside of Nick Easton, who's been cut already, right? So because of where we're at in the NFL calendar, I would prioritize getting a Jamal Adams deal done. Couple reasons behind that. A, with the way I could structure a deal, I could actually bring down his cap hit for 2021, which would help me save money for free agent offensive linemen. And if I get it done, I have a better understanding of exactly how much money I have to play with this year, next year, and beyond, and that's out of the way altogether. Now, if you don't get a deal done with Jamal Adams as free agency starts, at that point, the priority has to be focusing on getting some more offensive line help. The nice thing is, an NFL team doesn't focus on just one thing at a time, so they can and are doing both, especially as it relates to draft stuff for the offensive line. I thought that was a really good question. So I'm going to make this question then the pinned comment on today's video. What is more important? Type J if you think it's paying Jamal Adams right now, or type O for finding some more offensive line help. If you get the ad break here on YouTube, scroll on down and get your votes in. Let's go to Thick Albanian. What if Seahawks pick up someone like Kenny Golladay or Allen Robinson? It's a fun idea, right? You put either Kenny or Allen on the outside opposite DK Metcalf, and then you put Tyler Lockett in the slot, and it's awesome. It's probably a bit too expensive. A-Rob and Golladay could both be franchise tagged with their respective teams. If they don't, they're going to approach a probably $20 million per year deal. And if you pay those guys, you might run into an issue in terms of actually paying DK Metcalf. So not the route I would end up going. All right, from Kush, will Josh Gordon ever be back in Seattle? And if no, then Richard Sherman would be the best fit in Seattle. I don't know what the future holds for Gordon, frankly. You know, I want him to play in the NFL, but it's been a long time now where he just simply hasn't consistently been able to play. I think especially if you're Seattle side, you must operate under the assumption he's not going to play. If he comes back and he's able to play, awesome, great, add him to your roster. Until then, go find a new number 3 receiver. I would look towards the draft and maybe try and find a cheap vet. And don't worry, we will do a full breakdown on potential targets for that spot, both in the draft and free agency as the offseason moves along. From Carrots Ticks, do you think the Rams will win the NFC West with Matthew Stafford? It's a fair question. I know that the hype train around LA is certainly real right now. In fact, they're the betting favorite on BetUS to go win the NFC West. I am not fully convinced on the Rams. It does kind of help and also hurt. I think it's the best division in football. The West, you have the Rams there. The Niners are going to be a threat again. They actually have the second best odds. Seattle's all the way down at number 3. I don't really buy Arizona yet, but they're still a pretty solid team, and they'll probably be around 500 if things go their way, right? So I actually like the value involved with betting on Seattle. I don't think it's going to get any lower right now, barring a collapse, which point you don't want to bet on them anyway. So what I would do, especially for those of you who think Seattle's going to win the NFC West, head over to BetUS. It's chatsports.com/bet. Use the promo code you see on screen. That's Seahawks125. You put down $100. They will give you an extra $125 for free. So you can throw 5, 10, 15, $20, whatever, on the Seahawks. Given where their odds are at, you can turn that $20 into like $240. That's a major return. Go do it today. It's chatsports.com/bet. Don't forget that promo code Seahawks125. All right, over to Reese Branch as we get to the tight end portion of today's mailbag. Should Seattle go after Evan Engram? You know, Engram was a Pro Bowler this year who, interesting enough, should not have been one whatsoever. Tons of drops, bad mistakes. I don't know how he got it, to be honest. The Giants might move on from him if they especially take Kyle Pitts potentially in round 1. He's got the 1 year left on his deal. He'd be a little bit expensive in terms of money. And you also have Will Dissly, Colby Parkinson. Is that the guy you want to go after? There's also one from Morgan Danielson on the same topic, a more in-depth trade idea as it relates to a tight end. He says Browns get a 5th round pick. Seattle gets David Njoku. I think in general, Cleveland says no. With the way they want to utilize their tight ends, they're going to use Njoku quite a bit. Maybe they even try to extend him. Njoku, though, has made it clear he's looking to get a bigger role and, of course, more money as a result down the road. I think Njoku offers more passing game upside than a Dissly or a Parkinson, but you're also paying close to a premium in terms of his cap hit in 2021. Maybe that's not the best fit. But a very common theme here once again, as we move to Azan's question, what would the Hawks have to give up for Zack Ertz? Again, 3 tight ends here, right? Ertz has actually the more expensive of the 3 contracts we discuss here. I think he'd be the cheapest of the group actually as a result. I know that GM John Schneider loves to acquire tight ends. He just can't resist. I don't know if I would add any of these 3 guys via trade. Now, especially if Zack Ertz gets cut, which I think is a very real chance of happening, I would have interest. But because of the money, unless he redoes his deal, I would rather save my draft pick, save my money, and go invest it in the offensive line than to add another tight end. But if you could pick one of them, who would it be? Get your votes in here. Type EE for Evan Engram. Type DN for David Njoku. And then type ZE for Zack Ertz. Go to the comments and get your votes in, folks. From Dylan Monroe, with Carson most likely leaving, meaning Chris Carson, of course, should we sign a free agent or draft someone? It's a really good question. And my answer kind of gets to the whole point of roster building. In an ideal world, every NFL team would be able to at least somewhat fill the needs on their roster via free agency. That way, when it comes to the draft, they can simply take the best player on their board. That's how you're going to maximize your roster the best fashion. It's not as easy as that, though, especially when you're a team like Seattle, when you're light on cap space. So what I would do is I would try to find a cheap vet that I could at least have as an option in free agency. So many of you guys in this mailbag call, by the way, asked or mentioned Marlon Mack. I like that idea. I think he's cheap. I think he's a good player when healthy, coming off the injury. That's the type of buy low option I would add, so I didn't have to take a back in the early rounds or at some point in the NFL draft. But if I sign Mack to a one-year deal, I still have the flexibility to draft somebody if the value ends up being right. So it's a little bit of both, but I think you have to address it in some capacity in free agency early on. But of course, I want to hear what you guys have to say, right? So how should Seattle go about replacing Chris Carson? Type D for the draft or type in F for free agency. One last question here from Robert C. Resign Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas. There's always one of these in every mailbag. Richard Sherman, I'm down with. I do think there's a possibility that he could come back to Seattle. I think it's a bit unlikely. Maybe he retires as a Seahawk, by the way. I think he's going to chase probably bigger money and maybe even a better chance of winning, potentially, somewhere else. Although I think a team like the Jets could just throw money at him. He gets to play with a coach he likes. Makes sense, right? As for Earl Thomas, I don't think so on that one. Thomas is just not – he's not signable. With all the off-the-field stuff that's gone on, there's no way. And frankly, as long as Pete Carroll is the head coach, I don't really see any way in which they're going to go out and add a player who in his last act as a member of the organization flipped off the sideline. Probably not the route they're going to end up going in the end.